More than 500,000 lives lost, half a nation's population wiped out, whole cities reduced to rubble, and 23 million people starving. This devastation didn't come from a foreign invasion. No outside army brought this destruction. It originated from within the Muslim world itself. One country's strategic approach, Iran's use of proxy warfare, not only destabilized the Middle East, but shattered it completely. Stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, and from Syria to Iraq, Iran has turned the collapse of states into a deadly craft. But this wasn't done with tanks or foreign occupation. Instead, it was a far more insidious method, replacing legitimate governments with militias, pitting Muslims against Muslims, and weaponizing sectarian hatred as an ongoing instrument of conflict. The outcome has been a Muslim world tearing itself apart. The damage is so severe that it might already be beyond repair. Let's begin with Lebanon. Right now, today, the power is out once again. Beirut, once known as the Paris of the Middle East, languishes in darkness for up to 20 hours a day. Middle-class families find themselves lining up just for bread. Meanwhile, their currency has plummeted by 90%. Wiping out people's life savings. Yet, here lies the painful irony. As Lebanon crumbles, one organization is thriving, Hezbollah. This militia, backed by Iran, wields more firepower than Lebanon's entire national army, reportedly stockpiling around 150,000 rockets. They run their own schools, hospitals, and parallel economy, all funded by Tehran. Meanwhile, Lebanon's official government is paralyzed. It hasn't been able to elect a president since 2022 because Hezbollah blocks any candidate they dislike. Any policies threatening their interests are vetoed. Lebanon doesn't have a functioning government anymore. It's effectively a hostage. This grim reality became starkly evident in 2006. Hezbollah militants crossed into Israel, killing and capturing soldiers, all without consulting the Lebanese government. Israel responded with overwhelming force. In just 1 month, 1,200 Lebanese, mostly civilians, were killed. Entire neighborhoods in Beirut were razed. The summer tourist season, Lebanon's vital economic lifeline, was destroyed. Billions of dollars worth of infrastructure were reduced to rubble. Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, later admitted that if he had known how severe Israel's retaliation would be, he wouldn't have ordered the incursion. Pause and consider that one militia dragged an entire country into war, and afterwards their leader said, "Oops, my mistake." The entire Lebanese population bore the consequences, not Hezbollah. Today, Lebanon exists as a failed state in everything but name. Hezbollah answers not to Beirut, but to Tehran. While ordinary Lebanese sink deeper into poverty, Hezbollah shields its Shia supporters with Iranian money and smuggled goods. The rest of Lebanon is left to decay. One Lebanese observer put it bluntly, if Hezbollah ever had to choose between Iran and Lebanon, Lebanon would become roadkill. Lebanon is far from alone in this tragic scenario. Across the border in Iraq, the nightmare repeats. Militias control illegal oil networks, assassinate activists in broad daylight, and launch rocket attacks on American targets at will, pulling Iraq into conflicts it never wanted. But these militias are not simply rogue gangs. They are highly organized and trained and financed by Iran, systematically shaping Iraq's path with deadly efficiency. Iraq today is a tragic example of what happens when a nation rich in resources falls victim to external interference and internal strife. Despite possessing some of the largest oil reserves in the world, Iraq's official army is weak, overshadowed by armed groups that owe their loyalty not to Baghdad, but to Tehran. These militias have entrenched themselves deeply within Iraq's institutions and economy, effectively paralyzing the state's ability to function properly. Unemployment is widespread, and essential public services are failing to meet the needs of ordinary Iraqis. This simmering frustration erupted powerfully in late 2019. Tens of thousands of young Iraqis, predominantly from the Shia community, the very group that Iran claims to protect, flooded the streets in protest. Yet, contrary to what some might have expected, these demonstrators were not protesting against America. Their chants reverberated through Baghdad, demanding an end to Iran's interference. Iran, out, out. We want our country back. Their anger was palpable as they set Iranian consulates ablaze, expressing their desire to reclaim their nation from foreign influence. The response was brutal. Militias backed by Iran opened fire on these peaceful protesters, killing hundreds. These were Iraqi citizens, shot down on their own streets by forces that were supposed to safeguard their security. This stark reality reveals that Iran does not truly protect Iraq's Shia population. Instead, it crushes their freedom and exploits them as pawns in a broader regional power struggle. When these communities demand their autonomy and dignity, they are met with violence, not support. After 2003, Iraq had an opportunity to rebuild, an opportunity that could have ushered in peace and prosperity after decades of dictatorship and war. But Iran ensured this chance was sabotaged at every turn. It flooded Iraq with weapons, fueling sectarian violence and deepening divisions between neighbors. By 2006, Iraq had descended into a gruesome civil war. Shia death squads hunted Sunni insurgents targeted Shia markets, resulting in tens of thousands of deaths and millions displaced. Iranian-made arms were found across battlefields, underscoring Tehran's hand in the conflict. Today, Iraq can no longer be described as a functioning country. It is a fractured entity, held together tenuously by oil revenue and sustained through external meddling. Authority does not flow through legitimate governance structures. It flows through the barrel of a gun. The nation, along with its neighbor Syria, remains hostage to outside powers, but the situation in Syria is even grimmer. Syria is not just broken, it has become a graveyard. Over 500,000 lives have been lost, and half of the country's 26 million people have been displaced, either forced to flee abroad or uprooted internally. Cities that once thrived, such as Aleppo, Homs, and Raqqa, now lie in ruins. Entire neighborhoods are reduced to skeletal concrete, ghosts of their former selves. The economy is shattered. 90% of Syrians live below the poverty line. The currency is virtually worthless. Clean water is scarce, and electricity is a rare luxury. An entire generation of Syrian children has grown up surrounded by war. They have witnessed chemical attacks, barrel bombings, brutal sieges that starved entire towns, horrific torture, and mass graves. This brutal cycle of violence has become their reality. So, how did Syria fall so far? It began with the 2011 Arab Spring when Syrians demanded reform and dignity. Assad's regime responded with a brutal crackdown, plunging the country into a devastating civil war. For Iran, Syria was more than just a neighbor. It was a vital ally and a strategic land corridor to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Losing Syria would mean losing influence and regional power. Thus, Iran doubled down dramatically. Tehran dispatched military advisors, supplied weapons, funneled money and oil, and mobilized Hezbollah to intervene directly. This commitment ensured the conflict dragged on and Syrian families continued to suffer unimaginable losses. The fate of an entire nation was sealed by Tehran's decision to prioritize its geopolitical ambitions over the hopes and lives of the Syrian people. Let's take a closer look at the tumultuous regions of Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. 4 countries caught in the relentless grip of conflict, their futures uncertain, and their peoples suffering deeply. Starting with Syria, the war there has been prolonged and devastating, with Iran playing a pivotal role in sustaining Assad's regime. Iran not only recruited Shia militias from Iraq, but also brought fighters from Afghanistan and Pakistan, relentlessly sending desperate men who were willing to accept money to fight and even die in a war that was not their own. This grim strategy effectively kept Assad in power, but the price was astronomical. Analysts often point to Iran's unwavering support as a key reason the war dragged on for so many years. Without this aid and the later intervention of Russia, many believe Assad's regime might have collapsed early in the conflict, potentially sparing Syria from the devastating horrors that followed. Instead, Iran's backing kept the war machine grinding, turning Syria into a relentless meat grinder. By 2020, Assad emerged victorious. But what kind of victory was it? The nation lay broken, its people traumatized, the economy shattered. Syria today defies being called a country in any traditional sense. It's a humanitarian disaster under a flag that somehow still flies. Meanwhile, Iran secured a strategic corridor of influence, used to funnel weapons to Hezbollah and cement their military presence on Syrian soil. They may have claimed a win, but the Syrian people lost absolutely everything. Moving on to Yemen, the situation is even more harrowing. This country is widely regarded as home to one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, and this description is no exaggeration. At present, an astounding 80% of Yemen's 34 million population, over 27 million people, are reliant on humanitarian aid just to survive. Children are starving not because of drought or natural disasters, but because of war, blockades, and a collapsing economy that can no longer import crucial food supplies. Since the war's onset, over 150,000 lives have been lost, with tens of thousands killed directly in airstrikes and shelling, and countless others succumbing to starvation and disease. Cholera has ravaged the nation, fueled by the destruction of sanitation infrastructure and lack of clean water. Hospitals have been bombed to rubble, bustling markets reduced to ruins, ports blockaded, and the nation's currency plummeted to near worthlessness. Public sector workers often go unpaid for months, and Yemen's already fragile infrastructure lies in tatters. This catastrophic reality unfolds right now as you watch. No distant memory, but an immediate, ongoing disaster. So, how did Yemen fall into this abyss? The crisis began in 2014 as a local power struggle when the Zaidi-Shia rebel group known as the Houthis seized the capital, Sana'a, overthrowing the Saudi-backed government. Alarmed at what they feared were Iranian proxies gaining influence, Saudi Arabia launched a military intervention in 2015. Expecting a swift victory, Saudi Arabia found itself mired in a quagmire instead. Iran seized the chance to expand its foothold in the region, supplying the Houthis with weapon components, missiles, drones, and military advisors. It's enough to keep the conflict raging and enable the Houthis to strike deep into Saudi territory, targeting airports and vital oil infrastructure. The result was an entrenched, bitter proxy war. Saudi Arabia relentlessly pounding Yemen with airstrikes, the Houthis holding strong in the north and retaliating with missile strikes across the border, all while innocent Yemenis bear the brunt of the violence and devastation. Yemen is no longer just poor, it has been decimated. Its oil exports have vanished, farmlands lie in ruin, and ports critical for trade and aid remain damaged and blockaded. The country's survival hinges almost entirely on foreign assistance, which itself remains precarious. And despite the immense human toll and destruction, there is no clear end to this nightmare. Across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, the narrative is tragically similar. Fractured nations, ongoing conflict, foreign proxy battles, and populations caught helplessly in the crossfire. Each country is bleeding, both physically and economically, and remains trapped in cycles of violence that seem unbreakable. This is the current reality in these four nations, a stark reminder of the devastating costs of prolonged warfare and geopolitical competition. Let's dive into the role Iran played in the Middle East's complex conflicts. Unlike a conventional military invasion, Iran's strategy was subtle yet devastating. They never deployed their regular army to conquer neighboring nations. Instead, they embraced a method far more effective: proxy warfare. This approach dates back to 1979, when the Islamic Revolution dramatically transformed Iran's political landscape. The monarchy fell, and Ayatollah Khomeini established a radical theocratic regime, From the outset, Khomeini boldly proclaimed Iran's mission to export the Islamic Revolution beyond their borders, to challenge Western imperialism, to resist Israel, and to assert Iran's leadership in the Muslim world. However, Iran's neighbors, particularly secular Arab states and Sunni monarchies, viewed this Shia Islamist regime with deep suspicion and were not interested in adopting its ideology. Faced with resistance, Iran chose a different path. Rather than directly invading countries, Iran began cultivating loyal militant groups within these nations. They financed, armed, and trained these groups, effectively turning them into extensions of Iranian power. This allowed Iran to exert influence without the risks of open warfare. The proxy forces would fight on Iran's behalf, and if they succeeded, Iran gained stronger regional sway. If they failed, Iran retained plausible deniability. This strategy was first implemented in 1982 during Lebanon's civil war. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps stepped in to organize Shia fighters into what became known as Hezbollah. Backed by Iranian funding and weaponry, Hezbollah evolved from a disorganized militia into a formidable force. By 2000, they took credit for driving Israeli forces out of southern Lebanon, a major victory celebrated in Tehran. This success became Iran's blueprint. Over the following 4 decades, Iran's elite foreign operations unit, the Quds Force, led by Qasem Soleimani until his assassination in 2020, replicated this model throughout the Middle East. In Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Gaza, whenever instability surfaced, Iran found a proxy to support. This network was dubbed the Axis of Resistance, a coalition of armed groups spanning the region, united under Iran's agenda. Iran boasted control over 4 Arab capitals: Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Sana'a. But the harsh truth is that while labeled as resistance, this axis didn't actually resist anything constructive. It destabilized entire nations from within. Iran wielded a weapon so insidious that it disguised itself as something less than war, yet nations crumbled slowly under its weight. Take Gaza, for instance. Iran has funneled millions of dollars to militant groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They've smuggled weapons and trained fighters. But what has come from this support? Repeated cycles of war. Conflicts broke out in 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021, and notably the devastating 2023 conflict. Each time, Hamas launched Iranian-supplied rockets toward Israel, triggering powerful Israeli retaliations. The Palestinian civilians bore the brunt. Thousands killed, homes, schools, and hospitals razed to rubble. More than 2 million Gazans endure a blockade, trapped in what many describe as an open-air prison. Iran's backing did not liberate Palestinians. Instead, it locked them into an unending spiral of violence and suffering. Moreover, Iranian involvement fractured Palestinian unity. In 2007, Hamas forcefully took control of Gaza from the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority, splitting the movement into factions. Today, the rift between Hamas in Gaza and Fatah in the West Bank stands as a formidable barrier to any comprehensive peace effort. The Palestinian cause remains fractured and trapped, caught in a web of betrayal and division. At the heart of this turmoil lies an ironic twist. Iran's so-called resistance has done more to splinter the Muslim world than to unify it. Sunni Arab states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, now perceive Iran as a far greater threat than Israel. This shift has led some to quietly normalize relations with their old foe, Israel, an act driven by a shared fear of Iranian influence. The once hopeful dream of pan-Islamic solidarity has been shattered, replaced by a Sunni-Shia schism that runs deeper than it has in centuries. In Iraq, neighborhoods once known for mixed Sunni-Shia coexistence have been torn apart by brutal sectarian violence. Sunnis and Shia have massacred each other in waves of bloodshed. Communities that for generations intermarried now live in segregated enclaves, separated by high blast walls, and saddled with traumatic memories. Syria tells a similar tale, where Sunni Arabs, Alawites, Kurds, and Christians view each other with deep suspicion after years marked by sectarian horrors. Trust has evaporated. Lebanon, too, is gripped by escalating sectarian tensions, worsened by a devastating economic collapse and the iron hold of Hezbollah. Many Lebanese live in fear that another civil war could ignite at any moment. Across the entire region, social cohesion has been shredded. People retreat into narrower identities, sect, tribe, militia, for protection. The indispensable trust needed for democracy, pluralism, and a shared national identity is all but destroyed. Yet the damage wrought by Iran's proxy wars runs far deeper than political and military arenas. Consider the staggering economic, demographic, and psychological toll. Syria's economy lies in ruins. Before the conflict, it was modest yet functional. But today, its GDP is a mere fraction of what it once was. The Syrian pound has collapsed, losing nearly all its value. Entire industries have vanished. The country now produces almost nothing and survives only through Iranian and Russian largesse. Yemen's economic situation is even direr, effectively non-existent. Its main revenue source from oil exports has ceased entirely. Factories have been demolished, infrastructure bombed into rubble, and the country now depends on international aid to avoid mass starvation. Lebanon faced a financial collapse in 2019, labeled among the worst in modern history. The banking system collapsed, robbing people of their life savings as the currency plunged. Hezbollah's iron grip has stifled any meaningful reforms, and international donors refuse aid while a designated terrorist organization controls the reins. Iraq, despite vast oil reserves, languishes in unemployment and decayed public services. Billions of dollars vanish through corruption, often tied to militias linked to Iran. Investors stay away, frightened by instability and danger. The human cost eclipses even these grim numbers. Millions have died, not only soldiers but civilians, women, children, the elderly, entire families wiped from existence. Beyond the dead, the missing speak volumes. The teachers who fled, the doctors who emigrated, the engineers who sought exile, the young people who escaped to Europe and elsewhere for safety, and the children who were never born because of the devastation. This is the true and tragic cost of a region held captive by proxy wars and betrayals, a legacy that fractures communities, economies, and hopes across generations. In many countries, families find themselves too frightened or financially strained to have children. Take Syria, for example. Its population is actually shrinking. Half of the nation's people have been displaced, forced to flee their homes. Birth rates have plummeted sharply. Entire generations have been robbed of their youth, lost to war or exile. Across the border in Lebanon, the story is grimly similar. Since its economic crisis began, birth registrations have dropped drastically. People simply aren't having children because they can't envision a future for them. Meanwhile, Yemen's population, once on the rise, is now suffering devastating losses due to widespread starvation and disease. This isn't just about numbers. There's a profound brain drain happening too. The brightest minds, the best and most skilled, have fled these countries in search of safety and opportunity. Those left behind often remain trapped, helpless, traumatized, and overwhelmed by hopelessness. In Iraq, neighborhoods that were once melting pots where Sunni and Shia communities live side by side have become starkly divided. Years of sectarian cleansing during civil war have driven people into isolated enclaves. Even today, Baghdad remains split by blast walls and deep sectarian lines. Syria tells a similar tale. Groups that once coexisted peacefully, Alawites, Sunnis, Kurds, Christians, now live apart, bound by mistrust and segregation. The scars left by years of sectarian massacres and war crimes are deep, and they won't heal easily or quickly. This destruction of social cohesion, the very glue that binds a society, raises painful questions. How can democracy possibly take root when every group sees the other as an existential threat? How could anyone rebuild trust after neighbors have possibly been enemies in brutal sectarian massacres? Beyond the physical and social divides lies a psychological crisis, a profound loss of hope. Entire generations in these countries have come of age surrounded by violence, instability, and cynicism. Their only memories are of leaders clinging to power through force, foreign powers pulling strings from behind the scenes, and promises made so often that breaking them has become routine. Many young people no longer believe in grand ideologies or revolutionary movements. Instead, they see chaos and just want to escape it all. The once strong sense of unity across the Muslim world has been replaced by sheer exhaustion and fatalism. When militias and bombs dictate daily life, ideas like progress or resistance lose all meaning. As one observer lamented, hope has disappeared. And with hope gone, the path to recovery seems almost impossible. There's a bitter irony in all this. Even within Iran, the regime that has spent billions funding militias abroad, ordinary citizens are waking up to the costs. In Tehran and cities across Iran, protesters have taken to the streets over the past few years with slogans that would shock the country's revolutionary leaders. No Gaza, no Lebanon, my life for Iran. And leave Syria. Think about us. These voices aren't on the fringes. They represent ordinary Iranians fed up with a government that pours money into foreign conflicts while their own economy crumbles under harsh sanctions. Jobs are scarce, inflation is soaring, and the youth see no future. The protests in 2018, 2019, and 2022 made one thing unmistakably clear. Iranians are exhausted from sacrificing for groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Assad. Their voices demand that the government prioritize Iran's people instead. How has the regime responded? With repression, arrests, and violence. Iran's population is young, mostly born after the 1979 revolution. They don't remember the ideological fervor that once gripped the nation. Instead, they see a government that values ideology more than their prosperity, a government that sidelines its citizens' hopes and aspirations. The result is a people frustrated, disconnected, and increasingly desperate for change. Iran's international isolation stands as a stark reality today, a country cast apart by its own government's choices. The regime transformed Iran into a global pariah, a nation shunned and distrusted. This isolation even echoes in demographics. Iran's birth rate has fallen below replacement level, signaling deep economic worry among its people. Perhaps this decline also quietly protests a government so consumed with costly foreign entanglements while neglecting its own citizens' well-being. But the troubles for Iran deepen beyond economics and demographics. The government's reliance on proxies has rendered Iran itself a prime target. A poignant example unfolded in January 2020 when the United States executed a drone strike, killing Qasem Soleimani, the master strategist behind Iran's intricate proxy network. This precise act conveyed a forceful message. Iran's expanding influence had grown alarmingly dangerous. In the shadowy arenas across the region, Israel and Iran have exchanged covert assaults, a dangerous tit-for-tat escalating each year. Israeli air forces have repeatedly struck Iranian military positions within Syria, while Iranian drones have targeted vessels linked to Israel. With every such exchange, the threat of a direct war between Iran and Israel looms larger and more precarious. Yet, if such a war were to erupt, Iran's proxies would prove a double-edged sword. Far from safeguarding Iran, these forces could drag the nation into a devastatingly destructive conflict. The bitter truth remains. Iran's sphere of influence consists largely of fractured, bankrupt, and isolated regions, territories dominated more by ruin than prosperity. In securing strategic depth, Iran inadvertently isolated itself from much of the broader Muslim world. Once, Sunni Arab nations envisioned themselves neighbors. Today, many openly oppose Iran, some even aligning with its adversaries. Iran's initial dream of uniting the Muslim world against imperialism has instead widened Sunni-Shia sectarian divides. Outside its Shia supporters, Iran is widely viewed with fear and suspicion. The regime justified its authoritarian grip with the rhetoric of resistance and solidarity abroad, but now its citizens shout louder. They want change. They blame foreign adventurism for impoverishing their lives. Although Iran claimed to strengthen the Muslim community, many Muslims, including Iranians themselves, perceive that their country has weakened the collective from within. Examining today's Middle East reveals a grim pattern. Yemen and Syria have effectively collapsed, their governments failing to function. Their people endure mere survival, far from flourishing lives. Meanwhile, Iraq and Lebanon wobble precariously on the verge of collapse. One shock, one war, or one economic crash could tip them over the edge. And the fallout is contagious. As states unravel, refugee crises explode outward. Militant ideologies find fertile ground, and extremist groups like ISIS arise from the chaos. The decay runs profoundly deep. Sectarian hatred is entrenched, warlordism accepted, and heavily armed militias normalized within political frameworks. Restoring trust, government authority, and societal unity amid such fragmentation may take generations, if it's attainable at all. While Iran is not solely responsible for these regional calamities, both local and foreign powers share blame. It has been a central catalyst in nearly every major conflict or insurgency since 1979. By choosing to project power through the societies of others, Iran has contributed significantly to unraveling the very social fabric of the Middle East. This analysis is not about demonizing Iran or branding it inherently evil. Rather, it aims to understand how a strategy seeking power by exploiting existing divisions can unleash devastating, unintended consequences. Iran's leaders believe that, as they secured their regime, expanded their influence, and deterred their enemies, Iran undoubtedly became a formidable regional power. However, in doing so, they also unleash destructive forces capable of tearing civilizations apart from within. Once the process of internal collapse begins, it gains a momentum that is incredibly difficult to halt. Sectarian hatred intensifies, warlordism takes root, and violence becomes normalized. These elements embed themselves so deeply that reversing the damage becomes nearly impossible. Iran skillfully weaponized the existing fractures within the Muslim world, but once societies break apart, the effort to mend them becomes a monumental challenge. The Middle East, a mosaic of diverse faiths and peoples once capable, if only occasionally, of unity and coexistence, has been fractured into bitter and hostile fragments. The so-called axis of resistance that Iran championed did not rescue the Middle East. Instead, it ignited flames from within, setting the region ablaze. And once a fire ignites on this scale, extinguishing it is an arduous, if not impossible task. History will judge these times as a dark chapter, one where internal conflicts wreaked more devastation than any external invasion ever could. It was an era in which leaders, driven by the pursuit of power and rigid ideological purity, lost sight of their people's fundamental well-being. Iran's legacy in the region might end up being a hollow victory, dominion over ruins rather than revival. The very Muslim world Iran aimed to lead now finds itself weakened, fragmented, and slipping toward collapse. Once this collapse is complete, the damage may well be irreversible. So, what are your thoughts? Is recovery still possible for these nations, or has the damage crossed a point of no return? Share your perspectives in the comments below. And if you're interested in gaining deeper insights into how global powers rise and fall, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more comprehensive breakdowns like this one.